Okay. Hello, Dr. Catherine. I'm Dan Winter. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I know we're going to explore so many things today. I want to welcome everyone to the Quantum Coherence Medicine Masterclass. And I'm here with Dan Winter. I'm really excited to dive into some of these concepts with you. And your bio is just incredible. I mean, you have done so many different things from IBM to heart coherence to some of the things that you're working on now. Will you kind of fill us in a little bit about your background?
Well, yes, I was a systems analyst with IBM. I studied graduate psychophysiology with some of the founders of biofeedback. I invented the word heart coherence when I taught the HeartMath Institute to measure EKG and how to take the spectrum analysis. And since then, we've pioneered realheartcoherence.com, and we have a whole line of products based on what you would call quantum biology. We think we've defined what quantum biology means now that we know that if you take Planck, length, and time, the musical key signature of the universe, and use just simple powers of golden ratio, fractality, conjugation perfected, you get all the biologic negentropic variables, like 200 physical constants. So we absolutely know what quantum biology is. It is not subjective, and it's fractality perfected golden ratio times Planck. Planckfire.com, that's our field.
I am always fascinated when you start to break this down because it's so important. I mean, what I was taught in naturopathic medical school, what's still being taught out there is this chemical mechanical model, right? This randomness. Like that's how our DNA is working. That's how biological action happens, this random collision in the cell. And we know that that's not explaining what's happening. Can you walk us through a little bit how you would define quantum biology?
Yeah, I mean, the theory is quite simple. What motorizes and causes life and consciousness and gravity and all negentropy and all action at a distance is simple. It's named charge collapse, charge implosion. Visualize the stack of the platonic solids, our star mother kit, tetracube, dodecacosa, that perfect nest. That turns out to be exactly the only geometry which is the atomic table. Electron shells and nuclear hadrons are only simply a nest of platonic solids, as well as planetary orbitals. So that enables golden ratio implosive charge collapse, which is the cause of consciousness, life force, gravity, and all negentropy. And now let's take practical examples. I was standing there in line at the Santa Barbara Bio Co-op. I thought I was a little warm, and so I took my shoes off. And the minute my sweaty feet touched the wooden floor, the person in front of me and the person behind me in line simultaneously turned, wanting to talk to me suddenly. Now, the physics of what happened was the fact that I did charge collapse, named grounding. I got into phase with and introduced the electrical communion. So if you take off your damn rubber sneakers and walk in the barefoot in nature and that ground, you burp and fart, your metabolism accelerates, and you get into phase with. All grounding is access to fractality. That is a practical example of charge collapse. Whereas if you live in these electrosmog cities out of phase with everything, that is the opposite of charge collapse. So that's an introduction. It's called plankfire.com, Plankphire, plankfire.com. And newly now, since I have discovered why objects fall to the ground, we can teach what life is and what quantum biology is. It is charge collapse. That implosion is the motor of life and perception and bliss and cause of gravity, all negentropy, all life force, and all action at a distance, which is every spiritual story is about that action at a distance.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think what I talk about a lot with quantum biology is this idea of, just like you said, returning to nature, because that's where we see that charge collapse so beautifully defined all around us. Where if we're living indoors all the time with these rubber shoes, and then we go into the car, and then we go in the office, and we're spending, less than 10 minutes outside, it can be hard to access that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on quantum biology, charge collapse, and heart coherence, this toroidal field.
Well, when I invented the word heart coherence, which I'm credited in the literature for doing, I discovered the mathematics to measure heart coherence called a second order power spectrum, the cepstrum. You can see the whole story with lots of slides, realheartcoherence.com. Point being that the heart will come electrically into phase called internal phase coherence. I discovered how to measure that. It's simple. Your heart becomes a laser when you speak your truth. So that process is simply the amplitude of the second order power spectra peak, which is measuring internal phase coherence in your heart. The thing that's cool to meditate on it, that is an effective lie detector. It is an effective measurement of kinesiology, that internal phase coherence of the EKG. So when you speak your truth, your heart comes into phase, and that phase relationship is basically a lock to the cascade, which is related to the physics of heart rate variability, which is where the heart's rate is phase locked to the breath, which is then controls the spine liquid pump, the mechanism of Kundalini and bliss, the sacrocranial, and the Mayer wave, the zero point 0.1 hertz. So that 0.1 hertz breathing is an example of 10-second breath of heart coherence. So the reason, for example, Heart Math Institute only calls 0.1 hertz breathing, that's their only definition of heart coherence. It's more than that. It turns out the 0.1 hertz Mayer wave, HRV LF component, is perfectly golden ratio times Planck. Hello. It is the caduceus cascade of implosion defined. And that's why that allows that implosive cascade to work. And then if your spinal liquid is pumping, which your HRV in breath is the mechanism, it is clinically impossible to be depressed. So the whole physics is basically you get in line into phase with the harmonics of charge collapse. And whether it's EEG, EKG, HRV, Schumann, all of those frequencies are exactly golden ratio times Planck because that defines life. And so heart coherence is a subset of the concept of fractal charge collapse enables life because it gets you in phase with the universe. And by the way, to finish that thought, when that implosive cascade works, for example, golden ratio in your brain waves or heart rate variability, that implosion embeds you into what's called a coherent longitudinal array, the only physics of gravity waves, the only physics of action at a distance, and the only physics of ancestor memory and song lines. So the coherence that longitudinal coherent array is the fractal physics of the Earth grid, and embedding in that array is the only way to successfully lucid dream and therefore survive death and have a soul. And that's called physicsofsoul.com, that longitudinal coherence, basically the harmonics, which we now know creates lucid dreaming, which are Planck fire harmonics, which therify.net does pretty well, triggers lucid dreaming. Now we know why, because that implosion, phase conjugation, embeds into the longitudinal coherence, wrongly called scalar. And that longitudinal coherence is measurably the electric stuff which you take into the lucid dream. The harmonics are proven in university studies, and that is the measurable stuff, Ba from the Ka, Kazjan rainbow light body, which is called soul. It means the longitudinal array embedding that you go from the little array inside your head to the bigger array outside your head, which is called having a soul, indicated by success in lucid dreaming and taking memory through death. Physicsofsoul.com.
Incredible, incredible. And, some of the research out there lately by Hans Giesink and Dirk Meyer
They're close.
talking.
I tried to tell them about golden ratio times Planck, but since they didn't invent it, they didn't like, but they know that I'm right.
Well, and it's just incredible, this movement towards a harmonic ordering.
Yes.
And Yeah, I love that that is coming up more and more in the
Yeah.
research and that there's movement there. And would you say that is the geometric energy from which matter comes from? Is that
Matter is a name for the fact that when charge rotates, it stores inertia, and that mass is the only definition of matter. So rotation of charge is actually the origin of mass, and the rotation of charge is the only definition and origin of time also, because it creates that period. So learning why charge rotated, and it's really rather simple. The universal substance ether is made of a single compressible medium. I call it charge, behaves as a superfluid. And when that rotates, it stores inertia named mass, and it has a period of rotation, which is the only definition of time. So this bullshit about time space is bent is pure obfuscation. The fact is the only thing that's bent is the trajectory for the travel of charge, which rotates a little faster when you accelerate it. That's why when you accelerate a torus, time speeds up because simply the spin rate is accelerated. So once you know that time is only spin rate, you can understand why fractality in time is required, for example, for time travel and other advanced stuff.
incredible? And what do you think, Dan? What do you think of the idea of this plasma water inside of us? This water, when it comes up against the surface of our cells, or our fascia, our DNA, our microtubules, being able to capture that and lead that frequency if we're in that state of implosion, if we're outside grounding or we're getting in that state of heart coherence. What do you think of the water inside of us?
Well, it's a beautiful question. Obviously, I was the first one to prove that hydrogen is fractal because I proved golden ratio times Planck is the radii of hydrogen. And so that fractality of hydrogen technically makes it a phase conjugator like carbon and noble gases and platinum group metals. And phase conjugators create the phase conjugate implosion at center, which is negentropic, which means allows it to communicate with the array. So when you take for example, we have this new firecrystal.com. And when you take this crystal and you hold it in the phase conjugate pump wave called your breath, and you point that at water and then drink that water, all kinds of people are having healing miracles. What's happened is that there's a longitudinal wave comes out compressionally, the tip of the, and Vogel used it with the breath, but you can use other triggers, piezofire.com, for the phase conjugate pump wave required. And out the center then comes this longitudinal wave, which water is ideal at receiving because of the hydrogen. That's called a longitudinal coherence. And that is then able to embed in the array. And so water is so telepathic and so self-aware, specifically because of the fractal phase conjugate nature of hydrogen. For example, monatomic hydrogen is incredibly powerful. It's literally psychic. The same way the carbon arc for Tesla was. These conjugators, if you visualize caduceus coming from all 12 directions in the faces of dodecacosa, that's called a phase conjugator, like carbon or fullerene or hydrogen. And that means that there's implosion at the center. It means it's negentropic. It means it can embed into the larger array, literally the definition of telepathy in action at a distance. So water is magic for lots of beautiful reasons that have exactly to do with fractality and longitudinal coherence.
Yeah, I am fascinated by the role of water in the body and this idea of sort of these liquid crystal membranes, cell membranes, fascia DNA, and this capacity for it to act almost as a receiver for
Yeah.
this plasma, this
Yeah.
ether.
And that
It's
that receiver is going to work great when water's in nature. But you put water in these sickening metal pipes under high pressure and high temperature, you got the opposite. You can't embed in the array. So water is I mean, all of our psychics, most of them say the only thing they do is talk to water. Most of the psychics know that's you get up and if you got a good natural mountain water in your faucet, like when you're washing the dishes in the morning, you be talking to that water because you can bet for sure that the whole array is listening. And the reason is because that water is beautifully embedded in the array. So nice cold mountain water set free, beautiful. But this electrosmog metal, high pressure, high temperature, the water's dead.
absolutely, absolutely. What do you do when you're in that environment and that's your drinking water? Do you have a practice of how to get that back into a more coherent state?
Well, we live in the mountains here in South France in the Pyrenees, and we have magic ice cold mountain water in the canal next to the house, which for the summer is beautiful to jump in and do a Wim Hof. But so getting into cold water is a beautiful, very appropriate, useful thing. Now, we have the imploder.com, which are vortex technologies to restore the spin density of water. And they use centripetal vortex tech, which is piezo, the imploder.com, combined with centripetal magnetics, and it makes the water implosive. It's very effective and very powerful. It's a growth effect. It's basically hydration is served when molecular cluster size is smaller, which is what comes out the center of a perfect vortex, which I designed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's fascinating too that this comes back to what ancient indigenous cultures always talked about,
Of course,
right? This
of course.
respect for water and this collection of this natural water. I mean, Schauberger and his observation of vortexes, it's just incredible. And I'm hopeful that it's felt like there were just very small clusters of people like yourselves talking about this. And now it feels like this information is getting out there to more people. It seems like more people are awakening to the things that you're talking about here today. So I'm really excited that this is a time of return to some of this information.
Yeah, and people are sort of feeling it. I think they're getting the vision. Although I think also that because of cities and other problems on our planet, about two-thirds of the planet is already disconnected from earth and ground in their inner voice. But for those people who still have a chance at having a soul, they're starting to feel it because the logic is really very simple. When you go down that vortex, whether it's the plasma vortex inside your head that you call perception, or it's the water vortex inside the imploder, or whether it's the vortex in the center of hydrogen, in any case, when that vortex comes to a center point, named Planck, there's a conversion from the transverse to longitudinal interferometry, and that is the connector. That is the physics of all action at a distance. That's embedding in the array. So you got little spark gaps inside your head, and then the Earth grid is bigger spark gaps, a bigger array. And you got to jump from the little array inside your head to the bigger array outside your head when you dream and when you die. And that practice is called getting a soul. And people are realizing that that is the physics of getting a big aura, actually, which is plasma. And getting a big aura is a very simple electric hygiene, which is every activity you do is about attracting charge, sometimes called the quality of grace. But it's literally about implosion. And if you a million decisions every day, which broccoli to eat and who to kiss, eventually you learn to attract charge and your aura gets big or you're toast.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that there's so many, that's one of the things I love about heart coherence and using the breath to get there because, like you said, two-thirds of the population, I mean, a vast majority of people are living in that electrosmog, inside, not getting outside. Just under this sort of societal pressure to produce in a commodity way and really not connecting and then when you talk with them, oh well, I'm in downtown Manhattan, I can't ground, this isn't this isn't my lifestyle, but our breath, our thoughts can get us there. It's not something that everybody, I mean, ideally, we would all live where you're living and we would have that mountain spring water and we would like you have a very interesting, fascinating way to talking about the geometry of our houses and the layout of our houses to create implosion, where someone in downtown Manhattan might not have that option, but they do have the option to breathe in a certain pattern. They do have the option to use their thoughts to attract a certain energy into their lives.
Mhm. And well said that they can build a sacred altar even in the middle of electrosmog, and then they can learn to breathe and meditate. And hopefully they will have enough bliss just at that point to learn to get the hell out of the city and re-embed in nature. But what you say about architecture is very important. So we have bioarchitects.net and international conferences regularly on biologic architecture. And the physics is really very simple. It started when we proved you could measure whether your house is going to cause a seed or a child to grow. So when the capacitance of your building is implosive, that's the measurement, and I do mean measurement by power spectra, the weak capacitive field, of whether, and we predicted it and we measured it and we tested it. So we can tell in advance which house will make a seed germinate and a child grow. It's called implosive capacitance, which is pretty much the definition of life, what used to be called orgone. So if the power spectrum of the house has the Schumann harmonics, the phase conjugate cascade, then it's centripetal electrically, which basically defines whether the seed is going to germinate. So once we define biologic architecture as electrical engineers, we then determine which architect gets a paycheck. And that is spreading very rapidly. So you take these aluminum steel boxes full of electrosmog, and you can measure how fast that's going to kill every living plant and child in your school versus houses made of biologic material called high dielectric. These capacitors can be implosive, and then you get the right geometry, and you hopefully sight it along a magnetic line cross, and you have a vast centripetal force. The only definition of temple, which electrically and measurably is what causes seeds and plants and children to grow. So life force is that centripetal force, and you architecturally can design that capacitor. Living material, sacred geometry, avoid electrosmog, avoid steel and aluminum. Steel and aluminum kill awareness because they prevent charge distribution. It's called dielectric constant, which defines living materials.
Incredible, incredible. And pairing that with a change in our water, pairing that with a change in our lighting. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm I'm hopeful for the future, and I'm so glad to hear that that's growing and that you all are doing that. Tell us a little bit more, Dan, about what you're working on now.
I just want to say about the lighting, teachers are beginning to learn that you yank those poisonous fluorescent lights out of your kid's classroom and stick in sunlight, you measure a dramatic increase in attention span, at which point you'd think the teacher might learn the definition of attention span, which is specifically charge implosion. Hello.
I
No.
know, it's incredible. It's incredible. I've seen that. Yeah.
So, but anyway, your question, what are we working on? Well, I'm working on 1,000 things right now. So we have our carbon nano project, the fullerene project. We have our theimploder.com, which has just been unpacked into a whole new level of investment and development. We have our plasma healing technology devices. We had the therify.net, which is now somewhat obsolete. We have like 5 other devices creating charge implosion much more inexpensively and more powerful. Piezofire.com and firecrystal.com and plasmafire.com. And soon to come, we'll have Therify 2, which is this incredible new series of phase conjugators, which create negentropy locally. And, even Piezofire, this little device, I have it here. So piezofire.com it's our newest one that's been really developed commercially. This is out there and going like viral hotcakes. Like the first time we put these, we put implosive piezo in the piezo device, and then inside the yellow, there is shungite, which is a high dielectric lens for capacitance. And so you got a pair of these next to, in this case, our friend who had just broken a bunch of bones in her wrist. And she got like within minutes. And later that day, we just did 2 10-minute sessions. Incredible regeneration in that bone, almost while you wait kind of phenomena. And we know exactly why. You implode the capacitance, which is precisely how bones are piezoelectric. So we know how to make bones negentropic. So basically, it's an implosion field. We had a couple of people had hernia pain, and we just one session. It's amazing. So localized pain, all these things. So centripetal force is the opposite of pain and pretty much the definition of regeneration. And so we're doing this with a dozen different technologies. So that's happening. And then our brainwave system, the flameinmind.com, we used it to measure Jean-Charles Moyen, who repeatedly teleports with witnesses. And we now measured the brainwave, which defines his measured ability to teleport. And we teach the physics, which it's the same power spectrum. It's a golden ratio and octave both cascade from alpha to gamma in brainwaves. Your brainwaves makes a platonic nest implosively. And at modest amplitudes of coherence in brainwave, flameinmind.com, you can see this is how we teach kids to see without their eyes. It works very well. Perception is the vortex inside your head. And when you bring that vortex to a point, they close their eyes, they see a little pinhole open, and they look through the pinhole. It defines perception, basically. So, but then at higher amplitudes, that is the implosive, which defines stargates and teleportation, actually to inhabit, embed, and traverse the array. And so this is, some of the latest from our brainwave tech, flameinmind.com. And we have propulsion tech, and we have new water purification tech based on frequencies. And we're cooking a lot of burners over here.
I love that. And we're going to have all those links so that people can explore your work more in depth. I have a couple questions for you. This idea of embedding in the array, I'm fascinated by, I'm wondering if you can speak to the idea of this benzene ring in the body and complexes like melanin or neurotransmitters acting as receivers, acting as things that can more easily embed into the array. Do you have anything that can you speak to that at all?
Well, the benzene ring is typically a hex and a pent. The classic benzene is CH, which is hexagonal. The thing where it emulates DNA is the hex benzene ring is located adjacent to the oxygen ring. And so if you look at the top-down view of one ladder rung on DNA, for example, it's a hex and then a pent and then a hex, and then a golden ratio rectangle, and then a hex and a pent at the other end. My friend Gus Ciccacci, Sacred Architect, that was the top-down view of his house, actually. And in the hex part of the house is where you want privacy. In the pent part of the house is where you cannot have secrets, as, for example, at death. So the pent part of that array, which is implosive, is charge distribution perfected, which is perfect for no secrets and perfected distribution. The hex part of that, as any witch would know, stabilizes and isolates charge and fixes, which is to say stabilizes. So nature uses the hex benzene for fixing charge, stabilizing, and nature uses the pent to send the charge. Again, any witch could tell you. So the physics of that is that the hex creates octave ratios, which are square roots of 2, which are max charge destructive wave interference when they heterodyne or compress. So charge is then isolated. Whereas the pent creates only golden ratio, which is perfectly implosive, which means there is no isolation. Everything is distributed. So as you're proceeding towards successful death, for example, you've been in the hex for a while, which is where you might need a secret or two when you were alive. But you realize that at the moment of death, death is merely surviving an electrical black hole into perfected distribution, which is the longitudinal array. But to get compressed and distributed into that array, successful death is a black hole. There's a sequence of visions you see called the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, a map to how to die. And basically, your DNA is recursively adding a layer of spin each time, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral. And the lattice is hex. The tunnel and the spiral become golden ratio. And so when you get to the place, which is called pure intention, where you can survive compression, then you can be distributed. You are a shareable wave. The psychology of that is successful death is called pure intention because it means that each one of your thoughts is of service to all of DNA. And DNA has been in the business of gathering survival memory for 1 billion years. And it knows when you knock on the door whether you're a shareable wave or not. And anyway, so which is, to give you another example, the wave shape of the pressure wave you do when you squeeze someone to say, I love you, reaches max pressure at a golden ratio, pure implosion. The birth canal is a great example. Up, but The wave shape you make when you squeeze someone to say, I'm angry with you, is 1/7. It's been tested a million times, Centix Manfred lines, which is max destructive wave interference, which is electric. It's perfectly useful for kicking money changers out of a temple. But at the moment of death, destructive wave interference, 1/7, anger, absolutely will never survive compression. And so this creates what's called dizzy ghosts. And dizzy ghosts stuck in the land prevent fertility, prevent ancestor memory, and require advanced shaman to release. So, and we know how to release dizzy ghosts electrically. Therify is one example. And this is a very important shamanic service. So there's this whole conversation around the plasma hygiene for entering into distribution from hex to pent. And the pent and hex of the benzene ring in the body are a good intro, actually. Last practical example. Here's the last practical example. The microwave physics of mudra. So when you do this, I'm making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm making a pent. And in mudra, the microwave is adenosine diphosphate, 1.91 angstroms. So the microwave implodes. So this mudra accelerates metabolism. It brings to completion the witch's pentacle. Now, if I do this, the opposite, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's hex. That stabilizes and does the opposite of accelerating metabolism. So literally, the microwave physics of mudra, this is a hex and this is a pent, you see? So this is, you can measure Kundalini with microwave for a similar reason. But anyway, you get the flavor of the hex versus pent is a useful metaphor.
Oh, incredible. Thank you for walking us through that. Can you walk us through something else before we part ways? Can you talk about this longitudinal array? Would it be fair to um, associate that with the unified field, with ether, with plasma?
Well, the unified field is simply a name for the fact that the universe is comprised of one single contiguous compressible superfluid substance named charge. That's what the unified field is. And physicists who are dumb enough these days to think gravity is made of something separate from electromagnetism, those physicists should be hospitalized for schizophrenia, is my suggestion. So the unified field is quite obvious, but the nature of the longitudinal array is very instructive. It's literally what the Aboriginals called songline dreaming track, and which is their only name for God. It's simply longitudinal coherence physics. So at the compression points, for example, labyrinths, cathedrals, therifies, telepathy, cozy rev mirrors, all of these things basically only work where the magnetic lines cross and create a node in the longitudinal array, a successful compression point, which, by the way, is the only place you get commercial quality telepathy and has a dramatic effect on nuclear critical mass for similar reasons. So this successful compression at the nodes of the array, it's called coherent longitudinal EMF. It distributes the longitudinal component of the electromagnetic, incorrectly called scalar, which then will pass through about anything until it gets to the next node. But at each node, it then exchanges inertia with a transverse heat containing, for example, the only possible way to have action at a distance and the only possible way to have a gravity wave is that centripetal, which, by the way, if you look at the picture, how they made the first nuclear bomb, it's only about focusing the longitudinals at center, actually. So the longitudinal nodes are basically the essence of DNA radio because those compressional nodes, you can't start a cathedral or a labyrinth or anything fun, basically, unless you know where they are, because that's where the inertia of the electromagnetism blood of the Earth actually have foci at those nodes. So when the charge goes down a vortex, the inertia is converted in a caduceus down from the transverse up and down component of the wave. When it comes out the squirt gun of the tip of the pine cone, kissing noses, it squirts that coherent longitudinal. And the best practical example of that is if you would like to have a soul, the only possible physics is that when your DNA braids recursively and start to have bliss experience and you visit sacred sites and you have a lot of bliss experience and your aura begins to emit that coherent longitudinal stuff from the Kesjan body, rainbow light body. So making longitudinal coherence is the only definition of getting and having a soul, because inhabiting that array, getting leverage and centripetal in that array, is the only place to go when you leave your body. So inside your head, you have a synaptic array, and outside your head, you have a bigger array. But to inhabit the array outside, that's why these medical doctors, famous surgeons who had near-death experiences and describe in detail while they were dead, looking at their body from outside their body. And guess what? Ain't never any one of them been outside their body inside a metal box. Hell no. The only place you can look from is a place where the plasma is alive and not dead. So once you realize that when you're lucid dreaming and when you're dying, metal boxes are fatal, you're going to start to decide to move out of your damn metal boxes. That's my thought. Because the longitudinal array doesn't penetrate metal boxes, steel and aluminum buildings. Hell no. The Schumann resonance don't make it inside. No DNA radio. Kids lose their soul. Bad news.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. And I think what you're doing, I love the work that you're doing around children, around this next generation, and the importance of getting back to nature, getting back to embedding in that array.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. It's the grounding. And once you're, touching water and touching nature and have Schumann all around you all day, that DNA radio means you are going to have compassion, because you're going to feel everyone outside you as if they're inside you.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly what we need right now. Exactly what we need. Dan, can we break it down to somebody who has no physics experience, who has no, um, someone who is feeling a little bit like a longitudinal array and implosion. Can we just can we break it down to a child? To a child, I don't know. My children often understand more than I do when it comes to this stuff. But can we break it down for somebody living wherever they may be living? What are some of the ways, these practical ways that we've been talking about, grounding, water, what does that look like on a daily basis? What is that doing to the body and the energy within us and outside of us?
Friend of ours we've been making films with lately, Dahlia, she's having daily phone calls with Thoth, actually. And Thoth took her to this school near the Berlin Wall, a Waldorf school, and found out that there was practically a circle of 5G towers right around the schoolyard, which looked obviously like they had been put there to destroy the souls of these kids. And Thoth was a little bit pissed, actually. So takes her there, and they do this thing where they put up this weft and roof, this grid, this array. If you have a really powerful aura, you can plant seeds, man. Anywho, the point is, the approximately 1/3 of the kids on this planet who still have a soul going fast are like gold to every parasite in this corner of the galaxy. And they're all here to suck, unfortunately. And we have to learn how this 5G, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is literally inside of these nasty little insectoid parasites eating the souls of the kids en masse. And it's about time we learned the hygiene. That's my humble opinion. So, we have desperately, preciously got to take these kids out of their computer screens and out of their goddamn polluted magnetic cities to someplace where Schumann still lives, and that ain't in the city. Because otherwise, how Steiner said if the kids look at computer screens before age of 7, they lose the inner muscle to make an image called imagine inside their head. They lose the inner muscle to make a picture inside their head because they spent too much damn time in front of their screens when they were very young. They lose the muscle to imagine. Imagine that. Look, if we don't teach the physics of what soul is very fast, not only do do we get confused about how to define AI. We don't even know what life is for. So yeah, I have opinions about that. Excuse me if I carry on, but I do feel strongly about that. That's why my new website, physicsofsoul.com, and my new book coming out, Physics of Soul.
No, I appreciate your opinions. In fact, my son does the editing on these videos, and so he watches you. And the last time he was just kind of glued to our conversation because of your passion, and it brought up all these questions. So I think it's
I mean, you got billions of kids going to bed every night with Bluetooth in their ear, which is absolutely destroying the last chance they'll ever have to lucid dream or have a soul. I mean, this is pretty serious. It's hell, literally. This is the definition of hell.
it's 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 dire, and I think that understanding what those Bluetooths are doing is
It's a sharp
important.
wave. It's a square, messy, sharp wave, and it's literally hell. Oops, I'm sorry. Always too much going on here. Sorry, sorry. But no, you're right. And so the sharpness of that electrosmog and the seriousness is something that we really have to come to grips with very quickly, or our children are going to lose the ability to lucid dream. So I think that's why I think it's so urgent we teach our governments and universities the physics of what it is to have a soul, that longitudinal coherence that children can develop if they have access to nature and bliss process and proper living food, et cetera, and ley lines and animals and genetic diversity, everything that they lose in the goddamn big city.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they are right now a parent watching in the city, there are steps you can take,
Yes.
right?
Yes, there are
Yeah.
places, Castaneda called it the place of power, said, go to your place of power every day. The kid needs a place. Where is your place in nature where you recharge your aura, child? Go there quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I teach a lot about morning routines. Go
Yeah.
outside, put your feet on the ground, move your body, move your voice, get in that state of heart coherence.
Yeah. Find your
As
favorite
you would
tree.
say, embed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Find your favorite tree, find your favorite river and talk to it.
yeah, absolutely.
Stone circle,
Absolutely.
whatever it is. Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. It is always an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I'm so glad that you continue to do what you do and expand it into so many different fields. Like I said, we'll have all the links down below this talk for people to explore your work more, but it's always an absolute pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. Thank you for your dreaming about quantum biology. And now that we know fractality is the solution, we can all compress together.
Absolutely.
Thank
Cheers
you.
to compression.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.